Well, welcome back to the Blue Channel. And in our second panel of the morning, we are now looking at creating next-gen customer experiences in utilities, and a great way to follow on from our earlier discussions. So let's meet our next set of guests. We've got three people today. First up is Mark Royle. Hello, Mark.
Hi.
So Mark is the Chief Executive Officer at Zebra Power, and if you have a question for Mark directly, then Mark will be joining you for speaker questions, and that's straight after this session. So all you have to do is click the banner above your screen and it will take you straight into the room at 10:55 a.m. So do that if you would like to. Next up, our next guest is Eileen Brown. Hello, Eileen.
Good morning.
And so Eileen is the Director of Customer Service at Northern Gas Networks. So thank you for being with us this morning. And finally, our third guest is Stuart Dorman. Hi, Stuart.
Hey, good morning.
And Stuart is the Chief Information Officer at Sabio. So thank you so much for joining us. So let's dive straight in. I'm going to come to Mark first of all and just say, what does customer centricity really mean?
Okay. So customer centricity for us at Zebra Power effectively means, focusing on what's important to the customer and being able to deliver things in a timely fashion that matter to the customer. So each customer's different, or there might be different segments for our customer base, depending on what their needs are. And it's right from top down, from say, the management team have got to be customer focused, or the team themselves have got to be empowered to deal with the customer and their needs for that particular customer and what's important to them. So we need to talk to the customer, understand what's important to them, and not necessarily from a business point of view what's important to us regards that customer. It's actually what makes the customer tick, what things they value, what they like to see on their journey and their life cycle through the company, just as opposed to how we'd like to say process them more efficiently through the company, versus they might prefer to have a telephone contact as opposed to going on the web, etc., because of the age demographic of the customer might dictate that, or they want paper billing, or they want more of a sort of hands-on experience with their contact with their utility company versus all being digital and online. So it's actually understanding what's important to the customer from their point of view, being able to actually also have metrics and the feedback that those things that were important to the customer are actually measured, and we act on their measurements and we improve upon their measurements. So going back to the example where we were talking about the older customers, maybe a call pickup time is a really key important factor for those customers. So we have like a 12-second SLA for having first response in the call centre. So, and that's just because of that particular demographic. It's a really key measurement for those particular types of customers. So it's tailoring that experience based on those customers' expectations, their preferences, and what's important to them. And that's what we have to put in place is those measurements, the metrics, the empowerment of the individuals, and also to keep the management focus on that. So it's a variety of measures to support being customer-centric, not just saying customer-centric.
You've got to have all of those different options there, haven't you, for those different demographics, as you say. And if I can come to Eileen now, would you say your idea of what customer centricity is has changed during the pandemic?
Well, firstly, I couldn't agree more with Mark around the culture of an organisation. That's where customer centricity starts for us at NGN. It has to be within your business. And we've worked incredibly hard to make sure that is through kind of all our colleagues to make sure that we're serving our customers well. I think the pandemic has really shone a light on kind of the importance of utilities, the importance of the sector that we work in, providing energy and supporting our customers. So I think it has changed in terms of, I guess, the importance of the role we play. And the other thing that we're really seeing is, I guess, more of our customers who were just about managing but are now moving into vulnerability as a direct or indirect result of the pandemic. And I guess the real test of how customer centric an organisation is how quickly you can flex and adapt to the changing needs of the customers that you're serving. And so that has been, it's been a challenge for us, but it's been really good and encouraging to see how fast we've been able to respond to just the different needs that our customers have had, how more customers are working from home. So what does that mean in terms of the services that we provide and how we provide them? How do we manage those customers moving into vulnerability and offer more services to them and refer them to other people that might be able to help? So I think, yes, it has changed, but it's just really highlighted just how important being a customer-centric organisation is.
What would you say, Stuart, about how that customer centricity has changed during the pandemic?
So I think we've seen massively accelerated change, particularly towards digital over the course of the pandemic. A lot of organisations reporting that, you know, what would have taken them 5 or 6 years, they're doing in a matter of weeks. And particularly from consumers' behaviour, we've observed that more and more people are being forced down digital routes, particularly those demographics that maybe weren't used to using digital channels before to engage with organisations. So you've got people that, for example, were forced to do their shopping online, or they're forced to do their banking online, or even communicating with their families using iPads and FaceTime and those kinds of things. And largely speaking, those customers have found that it's worked pretty well for them. And I think that's really shifted a whole cohort of customers towards digital channels. And, you know, and that change is here to stay. There's no doubt about that. What we need to do now is make sure that the support mechanisms that are sat behind those digital channels are there to help those customers that maybe still need a bit of a holding hand and they're dabbling for the first time in using web and mobile apps, but you know, often need a support mechanism there if they run into difficulty.
Would you say, Stuart, staying with you, that utilities companies could learn from maybe other sectors or other industries about customer centricity and how that can help them to sort of differentiate themselves?
So I think, you know, customer centricity is all about placing the customer at the heart of the design process when building an experience. And there's a couple of things that we observe across the industry that for organisations that are really successful in this space. So the first thing is really placing a lot of emphasis on the design of the customer journey from the moment they onboard through to, you know, through the entire life cycle. And there's that famous sort of Jeff Bezos quote where he has a cardboard cutout of the customer in every single meeting that they have, and they make sure that they think about the impact on the customer. But really thinking about the design of the experience across all of the different channels and making sure that you think of the emotional situation that the customer's in and why they're calling in the first place, and making sure you design experiences around that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is about trying to break down the internal silos that exist between different departments. And this is particularly the case between the teams that look after the website and the mobile apps and the teams that sit within the contact centres. Quite often we see those teams being quite disjointed, and it's the customer that falls between the gaps. So those organisations that are really successful are bridging the gaps and thinking of this as a joined up holistic experience and making sure that the contact centre is plugged into the website or to the mobile app, and it's a continuous journey from a customer perspective.
That's such a bugbear, isn't it, when the different channels don't talk to each other, or you're not allowed to do certain functions on certain channels. That's just my little bugbear. Coming back to Eileen, how can personalisation, do you think, drive better customer experience? We've touched on this a little bit.
Yeah, we have. So I think that the point that Stu made about really understanding what that customer journey looks like is so vitally important. And we've done an awful lot of research into kind of different customer personas, all our work streams, understanding where the key pain points are, because if you don't do that, then you're not going to be able to fix the right things. So that personalisation generally won't feel authentic or deliver the results that you want. We've also, taken time to look at the journey that a customer goes on before they reach us and after they've left us, kind of the bread in our sandwich, because without understanding that, a customer might not reach us in a neutral position. They may work in utilities. Customers generally feel like it's a very disjointed sector. There's lots of people, lots of fingers in the pie, and they genuinely don't understand it that well, and nor should they. We should be doing the thinking for us. So actually taking the time to think about what's happened to them before and where they might go afterwards has certainly helped drive that experience. And then I think in terms of that personalisation, as I've said, just making sure that you understand where those pain points are so you can put the right fixes in the right places, have certainly helped us, and it can drive up improvements. So our customer experience score is 9.18 out of 10 across all our services. We're a regional monopoly, so customers can't go anywhere else for the services that we offer, but we always ask the Net Promoter Score and we're positive 45.5. So it just goes to show that if you do the right things in the right way, but have the right people sitting behind the scenes as well, then it can improve that service and that journey.
And where do you think, Mark, it becomes creepy or intrusive, this personalisation? Where's the line, do you think?
Well, I think sometimes actually, if you know the customer and like Eileen was saying, if you kind of recognise their needs and recognise the different customers and how they've actually arrived at you and how they're actually segmented up. So we've got some older customers on paper billing channels and some newer customers that will be more for the online experience. If we bombarded some of those older customers with text messages, even if they've got a mobile phone, they would be extremely unhappy and they would find that was an intrusive experience. And that's how, so how we communicate with them even and what channels we use will make that feeling to the customer depending on where they've come from and what channel they're through and the segment of the customer, whether that communication is overbearing. So how we actually communicate with the customer, depending on what segment how we've segmented them, influences whether that is a bad communication experience for the customer or a good one. So we try to understand that before we even contact them. And to that extent, our core system does all the things like billing, records the contacts, so on and so forth. But we have systems that work alongside them that advise our agents on how to deal with this particular customer. So as for instance, is a letter better? Is an email better? Is a text better? How are we going to actually communicate with that customer? Are they engaging in our digital platform or are they not? So as for instance, we might have a disconnected customer digitally. Can we encourage them to go digital, or is it that we're going to have to actually go the old school method and be phone, letter, etc.? And we try to recognise that customer. So not only when they've just joined us and they may be elected to be a paper billing account, but how they're interacting with the organisation. We actually learn and modify our processes and our communication with them as time goes by with that customer. And then that's how we hope that it's not a kind of a creepy experience for them and it's communication the way they want it.
The way they like it. Following on from that, Stuart, what challenges do you think utilities companies face in really getting their data and analytics strategy right to facilitate that personalisation?
So I think this is a challenge that's not just faced by the utility sector, but the customer experience industry as a whole. And what we see is that that there's an increasing recognition that the contact centre in particular is a real goldmine of data and information. And the challenge historically has been able to tap into that information and data and understand and make sense of it because it's so unstructured. It's lots of conversations on voice and messaging channels. What we're now seeing though are technologies coming online driven by this sort of rise in AI and machine learning in particular that are making it much more cost effective to allow us to access and make sense of that information. So a lot of the stuff that we've been focused on at Sabio really is to help our customers to start to make sense of that unstructured data, understand the kinds of conversations that customers are having with their employees and making sense of those conversations. So that's the first step. And then the second step is to start to bring that together and join the dots up and link together all the different bits of information that are being collected, everything from what happens online, how that transitions into the contact center, conversations with virtual assistants and AIs and those kinds of things. The conversations that obviously are taking place with the agents in the call centers, the voice of the customer feedback, and joining all of that together to really make sense and then start driving the personalization piece that Mark and Eileen spoke about.
And I wonder actually if that's made extra difficult sometimes because maybe the call centre people aren't your people or it's outsourced or it's contracted out. Is that an extra layer of the messages not getting back to you?
I think it can be, but it just comes down to design and how you design the technologies to support that, even within outsourcing these days, because a lot of the technology is migrating towards the cloud. it doesn't really matter whether that's an in-house, agent or an outsourced agent, or potentially someone working at home. Obviously, over the last 9 months, that's been particularly relevant. So cloud platforms are enabling us to centralize data and access data regardless of where that agent is located.
Eileen, to what extent do you think heavy personalisation will drive up the cost to serve?
Yeah, a really interesting question, and I think the way I would reflect on it is the journey we've been on in the last 10 years. I guess the technology side, the data side, was the very last thing we did. We focused on people first, getting the people right, getting the culture right, then processes, really understanding all the journeys, implicitly understanding what our customers were going through. And then finally, and it really has only been over the last 2 to 3 years, making those strategic investments in the right technology that we knew we needed to drive those improvements. And I think when it's done in that order, then it certainly hasn't added cost to our business. We're the most efficient gas distribution business, but we've done it in a sensible way and only use the technology and try to source the data that's right for us and for our customers. So I think it's been really tactical in how you go through those improvements. If your customers are having a bad experience and the culture isn't right, or you don't understand the processes, investing in data and technology isn't going to sort that out. It may well do in the short term, but from my perspective, it won't do in the medium to long term. The hard work comes in those building blocks, and that takes time and it takes effort. And that is in kind of expense in itself. It's kind of at the heart of it. We're based in Yorkshire. We don't spend money foolishly, but when we do spend it, we spend it on the right things. So it is my view that it doesn't necessarily increase the cost to serve if it's done in the right way at the right time.
Okay, and Mark, would you say that data is all about what drives the customer journey of the future?
Okay, so it's like Eileen was saying. Really, it's the organisation and getting the organisation in place as well, and like the culture. You've got all those building blocks in place before you really start to talk about the data and the analytics. But undoubtedly, data and the analytics are going to drive that forward in the future, because that's what we're using to really understand what's been important to the customer. And as Stuart was saying, knowing what contact points have been made with the customer, what worked for the customer, how we can interpret and how we can predict how the customer might respond to a future prompt that we make to the customer or renewal time comes. And just going back to one of the other points that we just talked about, about the cost of it, etc. The cost of us losing a customer is the biggest thing in the supplier industry, and the cost of the actual workload at that point where we gain and lose customers is really our biggest labour overhead. So actually spending and investing that money and that time in the analytics platform, helping with the predictive behaviour at the time of renewals, making sure we've delivered a customer-centric experience throughout their life cycle, really is where the payback comes in that data analytics and the time that we spend on that. But yeah, so that's the thing. But I think that as well as the data and the analytics, as Eileen was saying, it's the organisational structure, and actually, from top down, everyone understands those objectives that we're trying to achieve.
And staying with you, Mark, what do you think the channel mix is going to look like in, say, 5 years' time?
So, I think going back to a point that Stuart was talking about, I think customers are going to become more and more technology enabled and engage with the technology platforms that we can offer them, whether it be apps, web-based contact, or chat robots for them, and they'll become more and more familiar with that experience. But it doesn't mean to say that we haven't actually got to take that data in and still learn how that customer reacts and the types of question they're going to ask before they've actually asked the question. But I still feel like there will be a demographic with us for another 10 or 20 years, because I can think of my own parents who were in the mid-80s, who mobile phones weren't commonplace until they were 65. So they are not still technically engaged. They haven't got the web. they haven't got internet into the homes and things like that. So they still won't be on technical platforms. So we can't leave them customers behind. And actually, in the that channel still exists, and even in the COVID era that we've had this year, many of them customers would welcome the call. They actually wanted to engage in people and speak to people. And actually, rather than being sure when you were ringing up for a read and saying, we haven't had a read for you for 6 months, customers were actually welcoming the call that they were actually speaking to another human being. They had something to do for the day and everything like that. So, I think we are going to be more digitally focused as we move forward, but it's not to forget those people that aren't digitally engaged at this stage. And we will, I think, for another 10, 15 years still have that demographic. But undoubtedly, the channels will move more and more over towards the digitally focused and how they interact and how we segment them.
That's all about knowing your customer, isn't it? Who would welcome the call? Who is actually going 1,000 miles an hour and definitely hasn't got time for the call? And also, Stuart, what do you think the channel mix is going to look like in another 3-5 years' time? And what can utilities companies be doing now to kind of get to that point?
What's interesting over the last 9 months is that we've seen actually a resurgence in voice. And I think that speaks to Mark's point around customers that are uncertain and slightly distressed and wanting to speak to somebody because of the uncertainty that surrounded either their work situation or their bills or whatever it happens to be. So, we've seen this sort of ongoing trend towards messaging, web chat and asynchronous messaging, SMS, WhatsApp, those kinds of things. I see that carrying on, but it's starting from a very, very small base. So that will definitely be an important part of the mix, but I still think voice will be a very important channel as well. Obviously, video has been quite a growth area over the last 9 months as well. That's definitely something that people have written off for, a year or two ago, and that now seems to be an important part of the mix as well, but probably only for very, niche use cases. One thing I do believe is for certain, though, is that we are, a few years back, there was a huge interest in AI and people are asking all kinds of questions about how many jobs will AI take away? Will we end up speaking to a human at all? I think we will do. That's definitely, humans will absolutely be an important part of the mix going forward. But what we are seeing is an increasing trend. And I believe that, in the next few years, every single interaction will at least flow through an artificial intelligence or a virtual agent of some sort. But it'll act a bit like a really smart receptionist. It'll ask a few questions, understand what the customer's looking to do, and then either sort that problem out straight away or escalate it through to the right person to answer that call. So I think that will be, the kind of concierge type service that exists for every single interaction, and that will take the appropriate steps to escalate as it needs to.
What do you think, Eileen, about the passive customer? So what kind of steps can utilities companies be taking to engage or serve the disinterested customer who just wants their electricity and gas to work and they don't want to think about it or talk about it or engage?
Yeah, so I work in the sector and I love it, but I appreciate that view isn't shared by everybody out there. So I think the important thing is to really engage with customers in ways that they, or on subjects that they find are important, rather than just the nuts and bolts of what you do. So there's 2 real key areas that we drive on this. The first one is just the increase in how interested everybody is becoming about the environment and working towards a greener future, the climate emergency. So one of the things we're doing is really making sure that customers know the role that we are playing in that, and also the part that they can play in it. So they might not necessarily be interested in the fact that we're replacing the pipe in the street outside their house, and it might be an inconvenience, but they do become interested when they understand that could carry hydrogen in future, it could carry greener gas. So that's one way. The second thing is showing our personality as a business. NGN has a huge heart, and we're an anchor institute in our region. We've recently signed the Social Mobility Pledge, so we're working really hard to make sure that opportunities are levelled up across our network in those parts of our region that simply speaking, there aren't as many opportunities as there should be. So again, customers may not necessarily be interested in the pipe that we're replacing outside their house, but they certainly become interested when we talk about apprentice opportunities that we're creating for the future, how those link to kind of greener energy, and how we're thinking about our business in the future and the opportunities that we could create. So for me, it's finding those subjects that our customers want to engage on, and by doing that, you can engage more effectively as a business.
And Mark, how far do you think the customer journey can be automated entirely? I'm seeing that my internet connection is unstable, so I may have frozen for you, but how far do you think that the customer journey, Mark, can be automated entirely?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if we actually understand the data that's going through the system, and we understand the life cycle, and we map out the life cycle, and we design it correctly, some customers can pretty much be fully automated all the way through. If we ask the customers, if we get the data and the information right that's coming into the system, if we ask the customers the questions in the right order, and we've got artificial intelligence that can prompt the customer through and ask them questions in the right order, then certainly there will be a segment that we can fully automate. There's some side of human nature, though, that some customers will always want that voice channel and that human interaction. And it's actually, obviously, the cheapest cost to serve are those customers that are fully automated. But it's actually still, you've got to have the systems in place and the people in place to deal with that. What we are seeing is, and albeit from a fairly small starting point, we are seeing increasingly those customers move over to the automated channel. And who knows, the experience that we've all worked through over the last 6 to 9 months communicating with our doctors online and so on and so forth. I would have think that that's broken down a few barriers for a few customers that will be more starting to become more digitally engaged. And it's important for us to actually be able to actually still support all that mix of customers, from the fully digitally engaged to the person who will never log onto the internet and has no intention of doing so. So we are seeing it to some extent, Sarah, but I still feel like there will be a rump of customers that will never move towards the digital. You know, maybe for us as a company that does offer quite a few services to elderly customers, it would still probably be 25-50% of our customers, as high as that, will not engage in our digital platform. So, but we have got another set of customers that are online only that we're trying to encourage completely. So hopefully it'll be a bit of a mix of both.
And Stuart, how do you decide when to employ the human touch? Does the AI tell you this customer always rings us, they never contact us online, so this is the one that needs the phone call? How does it work? How do you decide?
I think there's a couple of things. So first of all, you know, customers, when it's an emotive issue, and like I say, as I mentioned earlier, we've seen this through the pandemic. When they're concerned about something, when it's something that they're worried about, often they need to speak to a human at that point. And the art of it is making sure that we can identify those types of issues and escalate them as quickly as we can, and make sure that the agent in the call centre has as much information to hand to solve that problem as quickly as possible. The flip side to that is that there are other issues where people just want an answer straight away, and they're frustrated at the fact they have to speak to a human, because often it can take quite a long time to get through. So the art, as I mentioned, is to try to understand which of those issues are emotive and important and need escalating versus those that are very simple and transactional that we can answer straight away. And that's where I think the role of virtual assistants, and particularly on the voice channel, has an important part to play there. And I think, to Mark's point, I totally agree that there are customers that will always, will never pick up their iPad or go to a laptop. They may not even have one to try to engage in service. Those customers will always, pick up the phone. There are ways, though, that we can design digital experiences on the end of a telephone for those simple transactional inquiries that are very natural for people to use. They're very conversational, and they can solve people's problems very quickly, but equally identify when there is an important issue that needs escalating. And I think that's how we're going to engage that cohort of customers that default to picking up the telephone, and deliver them a level of service that actually they may not expect, and they may not even see as being digital, but it's actually quite natural and conversational.
Finally, Eileen, I suppose all this digitalisation is really reshaping the workforce. So how can you best kind of reskill or upskill some of your workforce so that they can be the best asset to you in the future?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question, because whether it's using data better to serve customers or using data better to drive different decisions internally, we've certainly given a lot of thought to kind of the skill sets that we need in the future. And it may not necessarily be data input, as most data is now captured in the field automatically, or data processing. It's more data analysts and being able to make better decisions with the information that you're presented with. So I think there'll be kind of a transitional period, the next 5, 10, 15 years, where we are upskilling people that we've already got in certain roles that we now need to move to a more analytical role. But then I think key to that is thinking about the skills that we need in future and making sure we recruit the right skill sets for the kinds of roles that we will have as a business. But I do come back to whatever role you have in the business, that colleague has to fit the culture and the personality. So it doesn't matter whether you're analysing data or digging a hole. They have to make sure, and we have to make sure, that they understand the customer centricity of the business. Otherwise, the end result won't be right for the customers that we serve. But we're certainly seeing a transition now to the kind of roles that we need as a business where data is concerned, and how we do upskill those colleagues, but how we recruit differently in the future.
Thank you so much. I see lots of nods from the other two, but thank you, all three of you. That brings us to the end of this session, but thank you for all your insights. Really interesting discussion. And let me just say that we will be bringing you our Innovation Hub in just over an hour at 12 o'clock, and we'll have speakers from Rebel Energy, Quadient, British Gas and more right here on the Blue Channel. So in the meantime, grab yourself a coffee maybe and visit our sponsor hub. So why not follow up with Stuart at Sabio's hub as an example, partake in your scheduled meetings. Also remember, you'll be raising money for our partner charities when you have one of those meetings, and ask Mark Royle from Zebra Power a question directly in speaker question time. So you can access the Zoom directly from the banner above or from the event agenda. So continue networking, and I'll see you at 12 o'clock. But in the meantime, it's bye-bye for now.